Our gospel reading on this first Sunday in Lent is Matthew chapter 4 and verses 1 through 11. Always we begin Lent with the story of the temptation of Jesus. Matthew chapter 4, beginning at verse 1. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your life this day in Matthew chapter 4. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. On their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In our first reading, the reading from the Hebrew Scriptures, God commanded Adam, the human, for that is what Adam means. God commanded Adam, "You may eat freely of every tree in the garden. Every single tree is a non-toxic fruit tree. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat it, you will die." Or as we learned in the old King James when I was a kid, "You shall surely die." So many questions arise out of this account. Why did they not die, for one thing, in the day that they ate of that fruit? And if the tree is so forbidden, what's it even doing there in the middle of the garden? But maybe a bigger question to me today, is it better to not know the difference between good and evil? How is that good? And also, why does Eve always get the blame for this? For these events. Here we have the famous story of the fall, capital F, as it's called. Many of our traditional theologies claim that this is where sin entered into the world, original sin. This is where humanity fell from the state of perfection and happiness and well-being into a broken state of rebellion and sin. According to many old creeds, you and I inherited the disobedience of this event. The snake, the fig leaves, the apple. Though you'll notice, there was no apple. It could have been any piece of fruit from a tree. I'd be more tempted by a peach or a mango. That's just one of the many misunderstandings that swirl about this ancient parable. But my question for you on this first Sunday in Lent, is it better not to know some things? Is it better not to know? Is knowing always better? Have you not, at least at some point in your life, looked in the eyes of somebody you love and said to them, "Don't tell me. I don't want to know what that mess on the floor is. I don't want to know what you did with that $500. I don't want to know how you woke up in a dumpster in Ohio. I don't want to know. I can't know this. Knowledge makes me responsible, and if I know, I have to act. And so I don't want to know." When you know a thing, you are morally bound to act upon that knowledge. Was this perfect state of ignorance really better? Or is it better to know? And and to bear the burdens of knowing. The story I'm about to tell you might have been told to me by a colleague years ago, I don't know, but it's a true story. One day around Christmas time, some long time ago, a certain pastor went to check in the church mailbox. It was just a little Main Street church in a small town, a church that was attended by many of the professionals and the dignitaries and the politicians of that far-flung place, including one very well-known judge. And there was nothing in the mail that day except for a thing that appeared to be a Christmas card. But upon opening the green envelope, the pastor stopped short, shocked by what he read. There in the regular old Christmas greeting card was the ugliest, indeed the only piece of hate mail he had ever seen in his entire life, up to that point. For he was to learn the next Christmas and the one following that a piece of hate mail came every Christmas to that church. It began nicely enough with a note directed to the pastor himself. It said, "Dear Reverend, please deliver this message to your parishioner, Mr. So-and-so. His wife reads all his mail, and so I must send it to you." It went on to say, "I know that you're a good man, and if Mr. So-and-so actually followed your wise counsel instead of sitting out there in your congregation like the scoundrel hypocrite that he is, everyone would be happier." This was getting heavy. The rest of the letter was filled with the vilest accusations against this parishioner, who was a very prominent member of the community. He had put a child in harm's way. He had embezzled public funds. He had intentionally misused his office. He had used his high station to personal advantage. There was name-calling, defamation of character, and all the accusations were laid out in great, lurid detail. Somebody knew something, but there were never any threats. And so the pastor wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to give the parishioner the letter, to go to the police with the letter. What do you do? The minister was new to that church, that parish, and indeed new to pretty much any church, and relatively young. But since the letter contained no threats, he quietly stuck it in a file to be produced later if the police should need it. And then the following December, lo and behold, another Christmas hate card to make the folder just a little thicker. And then the next year, another. But because he didn't want to upset the man and his family, the pastor never gave those letters to the person in question. He sat on them and eventually passed them along to his successor when he left that church. One year, though, finally, the contents of the annual letter were especially disturbing. It alleged that the church member's wife was having an affair, which, I mean, you might say that to upset somebody if you were the kind of person who wrote hate mail. But it contained painfully precise details with names and dates and locations, almost as if somebody was following this poor woman. It was getting kind of scary, and the young pastor was deeply troubled and decided it was time to call the police. The details were just too exact. He felt pretty sure that the hate mailer was maybe stalking somebody with cruel intent. But then he had another thought. Why not call the wise old pastor who was the general presbyter in that presbytery? A presbytery is like a diocese, and a general presbyter is our closest thing to a bishop. Why not call the bishop's office and describe the situation to an older colleague and ask what he should do? That's what he did. And he said, these people, these parishioners of mine, they're not like you and me. They're rich, they're famous around here, they own horses. They have a huge estate outside of town. People either love them or hate them. And the older man was silent on the other end of the phone for a long time, until he said at last, "Don't go to the police. That would make it all go public. That would explode everything. And never mention these letters again. Your parishioner might already know if there's an affair. Maybe he doesn't want to deal with it. Maybe they have that kind of relationship. Maybe he's hoping he'll never have to deal with it. But if you tell him about it, he'll be forced to do something." Some people don't want their suspicions to be proven true. They want to live as if they don't know. Whew, that's a heavy opening story. Most of them are kind of funny. Did they do the right thing? The pastor and the general presbyter? Did they do the right thing or did they do the wrong thing? Is it sometimes better to not know? A more pressing moral question for that pastor was, isn't it some form of lying if you withhold pertinent information from a person? Something that deeply concerns another person, if you sit on that and keep it to yourself, is that lying? Knowledge never comes cheap, does it? Knowledge is costly. Knowledge makes us responsible. Knowledge can be a burden. It calls us to action, even if that action is just to sit upon a file full of letters. Knowledge makes us responsible. It's good that we don't know some things, isn't it? I mean, if we knew the future wouldn't happen. Because if we knew what the future was going to hold, we wouldn't do anything. And if we didn't do anything, then the future couldn't be the future, right? It would have to be something else. It's good that we don't know some things. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. What is it about knowledge that strips away our innocence and sends us running like Adam and Eve to the fig trees to make clothing out of the leaves? Now let's talk about this famous passage from the book of Genesis. Most people know about this story. Even if you know nothing about the Bible, you will probably know the story of Noah's Ark, the talking snake, and maybe the crucifixion. This story is so famous that I don't know if you remember. It used to appear on the opening credits of a show my wife used to watch called Desperate Housewives. The snake in the tree, the man and the woman with the fruit already wearing their fig leaves, which gets the cart ahead of the horse. But Hollywood always gets religion wrong, always. This story is kind of part of our cultural backdrop. It's part of our big narrative. Allow me to suggest to you that this story is a parable, like the parables of Jesus, like the parable of the prodigal son. No one asks, was the prodigal son a real person? No, Jesus made him up. We know that. The prodigal son is you. The prodigal son is me. When you encounter the prodigal son in Scripture, you don't ask, so this story really happened? No, but it's completely true. You don't ask, did this happen? You ask, what does this mean? If Jesus could teach in parables, then it should be no surprise that Genesis can teach in parables. This narrative of Adam and Eve is not really about the ancestors of humankind. It's a more than literal truth about you and me, about something that happens in our lives, about our fall from innocence into adulthood, about learning all the stuff we know that takes the smile off our face and the brightness out of our step. It's about the fall that takes place in your life and in mine. The so-called fall happens in the life of every person. I would guess maybe who lives past the age of 2. Why 2? Because I think it's about at the age of 2 that we become aware of ourselves and of other people, and mine and yours. Even though I know what's yours, I might want it and intend to make it mine. Every person experiences this loss of innocence, and it hurts. That's why they call it the terrible twos. We all experience this loss of innocence and infancy. Cold, hard knowledge rushes in and overtakes us. No talking snake is necessary. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil grows in every garden and in every heart. It's beautiful to the eye and its fruit is almost irresistible, but it comes at such cost. Knowing is never free. It comes only in exchange for our innocence, and it makes us responsible for the thing we know. I think somewhere, probably out there in the world, there is a cat with a crooked tail, because I have known a cat much like this one. And that cat's tail is crooked because it cannot resist the desire to know more. Its thirst for knowledge is endless. You open a cupboard, that cat is in there. You open a drawer, the cat jumps in just to investigate. What do you have in that drawer? You open a door, and without even knowing it, that cat is in that doorway, just checking out the room, making sure it's color coordinated or whatever. That cat is there. And that cat got its tail closed in a door once because its thirst for knowledge was just so endless. But does that stop the cat from coming back for more knowledge? No. That cat still has to know absolutely everything. It has to know everything. I think you and I have gotten our tails bent by some of the knowledge that we hold. And maybe it's in that way that we've learned that there are times when we just want to stick our head in the sand and try not to know something that we know. Because knowing has occasionally bent our tails. If I know, for example, that my lifestyle contributes to the certainty of ecological disaster, then I'm morally bound to change the way I'm living. But I don't want to. And if I don't want to, because it's too hard or because I like single-use plastics or I really love those little styrofoam packing peanuts, it's so hard. I will probably find someone who will convince me that, no, it's no problem, don't worry about it. Convenience is the thing we really love. And convenience almost always triumphs over principles. And if I know something to be true but wish it wasn't true, I can usually find someone who will assure me that I'm right. The thing I know is a lie. And maybe you've observed that believing something in this life usually has a lot to do with really wanting to believe it. The courts are full of cases where people didn't want a thing to be true, and so they looked the other way. That's called conniving. They lived as if the thing wasn't, even though in their hearts they knew it was true. Consider the heartbreak out of the divorce courts and the child custody courts and children and youth services. We're responsible for what we know. And so we will sometimes find it easier to not know or to pretend we don't know. Just try this. Just try telling a person something about themselves that they know but which they don't want to be true. Oh, nobody will fight you harder than the person who doesn't want to hear an ugly truth or just an unwelcome truth about themselves if they know it to be true. If I know that my inexpensive but stylish shoes are made by an 11-year-old in a sweatshop in Nogales, Mexico, then I have a choice to make. I can pretend that I don't know. I can say, oh, that's all just a myth. I can keep on buying the same shoes and find ways of excusing it. At least the kid's lucky to have a job, right? Or I can look my knowledge full in the face and decide to pay a little more money for other shoes that are ethically produced someplace else. Either way, knowledge, and that's just an example, knowledge, whether claimed or unclaimed, places a call upon our lives. It robs us of our innocence. It enriches us, surely, and it adds to the beauty and the wonder of our living. It adds depth and meaning to our days and our years. Knowledge does. But knowing a thing makes us partners with that thing. Look at Adam and Eve. In their guilty knowledge, suddenly they know they're naked. And so what do? They go and they fashion something to hide their knowledge, but the thing that they get to hide their knowledge announces their knowledge to the world. The very thing they used to hide it proclaims it. We can never unknow a thing we've known. We cannot escape its eventual price. Okay, I've decided I need to return to more jokes in my sermons. Finding a joke about Adam and Eve was not hard. A child was looking, the kind that you can tell from the pulpit was hard. A child was looking through the big family Bible in her grandparents' parlor, and she stared a long time at the old illustrations of the biblical scenes: Moses at the Red Sea, Jesus walking on water, the seven-headed dragon in the book of Revelation. Her parents were not church people, and so it was all new and strange to her, and she read with rapt attention. Flipping through the big book, she came across an old autumn leaf that had been pressed between the pages years ago. And she held it up to her grandfather and said, "Grandpa, look at this." He said, "Huh? What's that?" And the child replied, "I'm pretty sure it's Adam's suit." Mildly funny, but clean. Here are some thoughts about knowledge, because we all possess it. It's too late. We can't not possess it. We can't go back to the Garden of Eden at this point. Maybe someday. Here are some thoughts about knowledge. Knowledge is not faith. Knowledge is not faith. Faith holds very few certainties. Faith delights in the unknowing and glories in the possibilities of God's world. It stands in awe and in inspiration at things too wonderful to be known for sure. It is not the job of faith to know things. Instead, it is the role of faith to hope things and to trust things, and often to believe things. But if you are looking for certain knowledge, do not look to the field of faith. Second, no knowledge is complete, is it? There's always more to the story than we know, as the old general presbyter pointed out to the young minister in the opening story. No matter how much we know or think we know, there's always more that we don't know. And this fact should cause us to give other people the benefit of the doubt and to hold our knowledge gently and humbly. Thirdly, we should always be seeking more knowledge. Because anytime we learn anything about anything, we are learning more about God and God's character and the life of God in our world. Curiosity is not just for cats, it's a lifelong virtue. Fourthly and finally, and perhaps for the sake of this sermon most importantly, holding knowledge entails responsibility. When you know something, you are a steward of that thing. This is not to say that you should go out and tell all the secrets you know. I'm not saying that. It is to say that wisdom is meant to be shared, and you are called to put your knowledge to work for the sake of the world. To do otherwise is to do, as Jesus called in Matthew, hiding it under a bushel. This Lent, instead of giving something up for this season, you might consider putting your knowledge to work, someplace where it could be used. How could you do this? Well, if you knew a little bit of a foreign language, Spanish, Portuguese, Shim is always looking for interpreters with refugees and immigrants. If you know how to read at all, the Literacy Council always needs people to teach adults how to read. If you've escaped addiction, you could sponsor somebody who's still stuck in it. If you've walked the journey of grief, you can accompany somebody who is new to that journey. If you know about children and youth, we are still looking for people to teach our children and youth in this church. You get the idea. Your knowledge can be useful to the world. Maybe ignorance is sometimes bliss. Is it sometimes better not to know a thing? Perhaps, but it's too late now. You know too much. You know so much. And when you know a thing, you are responsible for that thing. And it becomes your calling. And it becomes your gift. God grant us the grace to live responsibly with all that we know. Amen.